Hey everyone, welcome to Shaper Sessions. My name is Jake,
And I'm Russ.
and today we are going to talk about sleds. Specifically, we're going to highlight a ShaperHub project that we found from a user named Randall that makes a Shaper-built table saw sled. We're going to cover a couple of different types of sleds as well, but really, we like to highlight certain projects now and again. I saw this one, and I said, you know what, we kind of need a new table saw sled too. So
Yeah, we do.
I made one a long time ago, and it's way too big and bulky, and this one is nice and simple, straightforward. I think he actually calls it like the OCD's table saw sled, and I just love how simple and pleasing it is. I'm going to go through how to build it, a couple of things that we learned while we built it, and pleasing it is. Why we built it in the first place.
Yeah.
Let's start off with what a table saw sled actually is. Why would you use a sled versus just going at it free-handed?
I got a piece right here that could illustrate that
Great.
for us. So this is a piece of lumber that you would typically mill down, first step to starting your project. And everyone's familiar with ripping, I think, which is where you feed your stock the long way down the fence, between the fence and your saw blade. You got a lot of really good support all along this edge of your piece. But imagine you wanted to cut this in half or to 3 inches long or something like that. When you do that, you don't have if you try to do that the same way as ripping, you don't have enough reference face here at all to support the work. So when you're trying to keep it nice and perpendicular across the saw blade, you A, can't get it straight, and B, even worse, there's chance that as you feed through the blade, as you come away from perpendicular, you bind and you get kickback or other really bad things, or even just mess up your workpiece. And so what this crosscut sled does is takes that long fence direction and makes you another basically perpendicular fence that rides behind your workpiece and supports it so that you've got nice support all the way through your cut.
Now there's a couple of different ways to do that. You can use a miter fence, but a table saw sled, what's really nice about it is it's a larger surface that you can kind of work on. In this particular sled, there's built-in hold downs, T-slot clamps, so you can actually use hold downs for small things. And just when you're doing small part batch work, it's really, really handy to have a full sled situation. We went through and built one. We're going to build parts of another one today because, and I'll point this out again earlier, it's helpful to have two sleds because you have one for 90, where the blade is at 90 degrees, and another at 45. Can't have both in one sled.
We'll show you.
Well, yeah, we'll show you.
We have the old one. We did that with the last one, and so it's kind of nice. We're doing the cooking show thing where we've got one done and we're going to make the second one, but it's not just that. We really want two, and we'll show you why. We'll go over to the table saw in a little bit. But let's talk about sleds more broadly. We've got all different kinds of sleds.
Exactly.
It's not just crosscut sleds also that we've got here at the shop.
Yeah, pretty much anything that goes on top of a table saw sled and rides along with it, or on top of a table saw, is considered a sled. One of my favorites, other than the typical crosscut sled, is the Spline Sled, which can be really, really handy when you're trying to reinforce mitered corners. This is a beautiful frame that Russ built himself, and miters, when they're coming together, it's end grain, so you're not going to get that substantial of a joint or a connection in the glue.
Let's go to the bench cam.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So if you want to hop down there.
Yeah.
You can hop down there, Goose. Or not. Hey, there it is.
Hey, okay.
Okay,
Cool.
so splines are giving you that reinforcement through the grain and just make that joint significantly stronger. I guess we should go show that off. Should we go grab it?
Yeah, let's go grab it.
And then we can bring it back to the saw. There's a couple of different styles. The one that I built rides directly on the fence. You can also make one that sits in the tracks, just like the sled that we're going to build today does. But I find this one is a quicker, easier method to do. We're going to be jumping back and forth from the table saw and the studio today. Thank you very much. All right. So this is the spline sled that we made. Very simple construction. Idea is this slips directly over your fence and allows you to ride on top of it, and your frame sits neatly in there, like so. And that brings it down at exactly 45-degree angle and allows you to cut, and just by adjusting the height of your table saw blade, how deep your spline is going to go. Yep. And you got 2 clamp points for when you haven't put glass or anything in it yet. You can actually clamp straight through.
So what I did with this one, it's really easy to do all 4 corners at once. You've got your same distance set up here, and then you can also see maybe that the distance from this edge to the spline is exactly equal from the other edge to the spline. And all I did, I just set this up once. I mounted it this way, did these 4 corners, and then when I was done with those 4 corners, I just flipped it around. So you get twice as many splines for one setup.
Yep. I'm very curious to hear what everyone else's favorite jig, or specifically table saw jig, that they have in their shop. If they can post in the comments what that looks like, because I'm always looking to make more. Another jig that we have is well, I guess it's kind of a multi-use. It's a tenoning jig / rabbit jig, really any time that you want to cut things up on end. Now those were actually done at Origin, but this is the exact use case that we built this for. Being able to do a deep rabbit like that, or put on end and do a tenon. It's just nice to be able to, you have these T-tracks, you clamp something, same situation, this is riding on the fence, so you can adjust the dimension and so on and so forth. And then a nice 90 registration here. Cool. So simple, crude kind of fixtures that become really, really, really handy when you're trying to do repeatable things on the table saw. So where does that put us? Coming back to this sled, yes, there we go. This is the ShaperHub project that we are focusing on today. And what we really liked about it is all the available T-track. You have the hold down T-tracks that are on the right and the left of the blade. You also have the rear fence T-track to put a stop block on. So we picked up a bunch of, it's on the way. That stop block specifically is on its way, but we have some leftover T-track from Rocklear, and Ted's going to go ahead and post that in the comments, a link to that stuff. It's really, really handy stuff to use, to have around the shop. It works with the toggle style clamp, the same style of clamp that's on Workstation.
We got a couple of these over here.
Yep.
This is what that track looks like, just loose.
There you go. And that's what we're going to be fitting into those slots today. But the other tricky thing about making a table saw sled is getting it to be totally square to your blade. Now, there's all kinds of tricks to do that traditionally, but the nice part about building this with Origin is it takes all that guesswork out of the situation. We're going to cut, using our grid system and flip, we're going to cut our track for the rails that actually sit into the table saw, as well as the same dado on the opposite side for the back fence that your work goes against. So, yeah, I've already cut some that I kind of want to talk about before we step over the table saw and show off kind of the dry fit final product. I only cut one of these here. Now, in the first one we did, we cut both, and we found that even though this is set up for the file itself is set up for a saw stop, our 2 dados were ever so slightly off, and our rails weren't fitting. But it dawned on me there might be slight changes from brand to brand, or whatever it is, from saw to saw, and how far those rails are apart, or those slots are apart. And you really only need to cut one to be able to establish where the second one is. You're still going to get that perfectly square setup, and it will help you move on to like the more traditional method of attaching the second rail when you already have this set up. So should we just run over to the table saw now and talk about it?
Let's pop over.
All right, I'm going to bring these with us. Field trip.
Going over to the table saw. We got all kinds of goodies over here.
Okie dokie.
Hey, are we on? All right.
We have to trust that you can see us because we can't see you. Sorry.
All good.
I want to show off the original before we show off the improved version. This is something I made years ago, and it's just a hulking,
Oh, it's heavy.
heavy behemoth of a sled. And it was a little sticky. I never really liked how
It is a little sticky.
how it felt. It was too big, and I don't know if you can see it, but right up at the front, we have both a 90-degree cut and a 45 cut, which results in a big old channel cut down the middle. So any small parts are going to fall down in there. You're not getting that kind of tight throat that you want on something like this that makes good clean cuts and also safe cuts. It was all origin cut. You can see all friction fit together, and then a little bit of glue to make it permanent. But it's just too big, and nobody wanted to use it because it was such a pain to bring around.
Very bulky. No T-track on that one?
It did have T-track. I stole it for this project.
Okay. Well, the T-track's very nice to have.
All right, this is so much nicer, so much lighter. I feel so free and mobile with it. Pops into there. Where is it? Boom. And so nice.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So one thing that Russ went ahead and did, he made our rails before any of this started. He made those rails to fit exactly into these tracks on our table saw. So he got that dialed in. Used 1/2-inch ply. A lot of people used hardwood. We decided to use ply just because it was super dimensionally stable, and we weren't going to get any movement, and it seemed to be plenty hard enough. But I'm sure there's other opinions out there about that. Now, that second dado that we were talking about is built into the file, and it's so close to fitting on our saw, but it didn't quite. So what I'm going to do in the second round is I'm only going to cut one, which is going to be just fine. It will still function beautifully, actually, with just one rail. But to add that second one, we're going to use the traditional method of thinning our pieces down a little bit, having them sit in our tracks. I've heard there's a couple tricks you can use, like set them on dimes or nickels. I think a dime actually, and just gives you a little bit of space on the backside. Put that through the thickness planer or the thickness sander until it's flush with the top surface. And when you slide this over, make some markings, and you'll be able to drill straight down into the top of it. Then you have your two rails totally parallel to each other. And it's all coming off of Origin's original cuts.
Yep, that first rail that we're cutting with Origin is what's constraining the perpendicularity of this crosscut sled. And it doesn't have to be perfectly perpendicular if you don't want it to be. If you're cutting a 10-degree angle on something, you could make a 10-degree crosscut sled or a 45-degree miter sled.
Yeah.
This file is for a crosscut sled, but it's all flexible.
Yeah.
It's all about making the fixtures that you need for your specific projects. It just so happens that most people need a 90-degree crosscut sled.
Well, it's also the benefit too of the T-track itself. You can kind of build a subtle degree jig off of that T-track.
That too.
Using stop blocks and things like that.
That too.
Another thing I really liked about this project is in the file, that's the handle. We're just taking that ply and doubling up on it. And with a 1/4-inch roundover bit on a trim router, it matches up to the mortise for that front handle perfectly. Allows you to get the fit really, really nice. And same thing with the fence back here. Double up ply. Now, something to note as well, everyone's plywood's different thickness. Even the same type of plywood on a different day is a different thickness, ever so slightly. But remember, we're using origin, so that ever so slight difference matters. Somebody turn the lights on. And so when you're approaching this project, consider the thickness of your ply and creep up on that final dimension. We'll go over it later when we actually cut these pieces, but I ended up using a positive offset to nail this fit, so I didn't even go to a 0-inch offset. And that's
I think
perfect.
Nominal ply in the States is 3/4, but typically I think what we've been getting is 0.69 or so inch here.
Yeah,
and
0.73.
if you double that up, you're an 1/8 inch off. So great thing about origin, just use those offsets to dial it in as you go.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's the crosscut sled.
That's the crosscut sled.
Anything more to say about that?
Well, I haven't taken my shaper tape off just in case I needed to make any adjustments. Everything fits. I've tested the T-track. It fits great. I'm waiting for the final bit of T-track that comes up here and the male. And then we'll have a beautiful table.
Nice. Let's just show this with the material in here. Just in case nobody's seen a crosscut sled before, you would put you would put this in here or here, probably this way, and that allows you to feed it across with that good reference face, as opposed to trying to use this tiny face on the fence, which is a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. This way on the fence, this way on our nice crosscut sled.
Yep. While we're over here, it's worth mentioning a couple other ways to do the same thing. We have if we move this momentarily.
Yeah. Here, I got this.
Thank you. I'm going to grab the miter gauge, which typically comes with your saw. That slides into just one of those and allows you to do a very similar operation. Put a sacrificial board, screw it directly onto it, allows you to make pretty repeatable cuts. But for adding things like stop blocks and things like that, it's nice to have a sled.
Fixturing.
Yeah.
Our crosscut sled's probably going to be more accurate than that thing too, isn't it?
True. It's nice to quickly adjust the angle on this thing, but yeah, you always want to make sure that it's nice and square. Should we show off our big crosscut?
Yeah, we should.
Setup?
It's pretty sweet. I mean, it's one of the coolest functions of this saw.
So
Get that going.
We're fortunate to have the sliding attachment for our table saw, which allows us to do really, really long crosscuts when we're doing full timber crosscuts that are wider than our miter saw can handle. And it's a really great system. It can be set up in this version, which is the traditional setup, or the European setup, which is the fence is in front of the material in the European setup and behind the material in the traditional setup. And it's killer. It's really great for doing full sheets.
Really cool.
It allows me to do full sheets by myself. And yeah, just wanted to show that off as another alternative.
This one we can set up to
Yeah, we can also adjust the angle.
20 degrees or whatever you want it to be also. Yeah, sweet. I love this thing. But smaller parts,
Right.
you might want a smaller sled. You probably want a smaller sled. I've done small parts on this thing, and it's a bit much.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely more for bigger things. All right. Thanks for joining us over at the table saw. We're going to head back on over to the studio and carry on. Voila. It's the first time we've done that, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah, off studio shots. That was fun.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I love it.
Let's talk about this setup with Origin. So I've already scanned my board in. I'm working on a 2 foot by 4 foot piece of 3/4 ply. Now that 24-inch dimension on the side. That's really important because this sled, sorry, is 24 by 36 in dimension. So I want that little extra bit of material up at the front so that I could still have space for shaper tape. And the nice thing about having it cut to 24 inches is it saves me some cutting because I'm just placing my design to the very corner, so some of these straightaways are already cut by saw.
Pretty nice.
Okay.
And those are not your reference edges for your fence or for your rail. So
Correct.
if you're not cutting them, then it's totally cool. They can be rough.
Right. Everything that we care about as far as perpendicularity, we are going to cut.
Yeah.
All right. I am going to zoom out here and show off what the file itself looks like. It's all baked into one file. So if you hop down to my screen, I am starting on this side, and you can see that's the whole crosscut sled, but it's a double-sided cut. We're going to talk about how we did that. You can see my grid is set up on the bottom right here, so that means I probed 1, 2, and 3, and I locked that file down at 0, 0 right here. Sure. Yeah, I don't know. For the sake of it, I'm going to repeat this process on the next once we do the flip, but I just want to show you what my first setup actually looked like. Now you can see I've only cut one of these dados. Again, that's kind of the lesson that I learned. I'm going to cut one with origin. It's going to give me that perpendicularity, and then I'm going to do the second one by hand, in the kind of traditional way. So that's already done. I've dialed in my fit for that. It's a nice tight friction fit, and if you want to hop down on this cam, like super snug fit. And if I needed to open that up anymore, I could just use that negative offset and dial it in even more, but I'm really happy with how that fits. It's kind of that squeaky fit, which is what I like to hear. All right, let's flip the whole board and do the opposing face. Now, remembering the fact that I did my first grid down here on this corner, that means when I flip the board, ooh, don't want to hit that camera.
Here we go.
Thanks.
Yep.
Now, I'm going to use this bottom corner as my reference. So I'm using that same corner, but I just have to remember, now when I'm setting up this grid, it's probe, probe, left side.
And to add one thing to that, I don't like to have to remember personally, so I would just mark that corner with a pencil. Like, put a O there, O for origin. This is my 0 point, or you could do like math grid style 0, 0 right there. Yep. That way you don't get confused. You could flip it the other way and still keep track.
Big fans of putting marks all over your piece.
Everything.
Because you're going to sand it anyways. So
yeah, whoever got that Elate lamp kit last week, that has all kinds of marks on it.
Yeah,
that's from me keeping track of jointing surfaces and making sure that everything's nice and square.
Yeah, for those that you missed it, we did a whole session on the Elate lamp by Leah Amick. It's behind us.
Right here.
And we had 2 sets of pre-made material made by Russ that we shipped out as giveaways, which, we don't always do that kind of thing, but it's fun when we do.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So which corner are we gridding off of again, Jake?
Bottom left.
Nice.
Bottom left. I even actually went as far as putting a mark on this face because for my third probe, I kind of want to probe off of this same general area just to give myself a little peace of mind because I'm really wanting this thing to be square. Everything's built off squareness. So let's start this process over. I'm going to rescan and replace that file. Even then, I've gone ahead and cut some things. I just want to show the process of what the flip looks like.
So we're scanning nice and smooth here. You want to make sure you get a good overlap between all of the images that Origin is taking. the smoother it is, the smoother it's going to come out. Try not to take, too many, too few pictures. Definitely too few is a bad thing. Too many, it might slow down a little bit. You'll get there still. And we want to just make sure that we get those edges also, overlap all the edges.
Let it put those together. I always like to, just as a rule of thumb, I always start at the top left of my workpiece and work my way down. I suppose you could start at the bottom and work your way up, but once, at least for me, once I get in the habit of doing something and I know I can kind of perfect it and get that overlap really nicely, I like to stick with it.
Yeah.
So that's how I always tell people to do it. All right, so let's start off with that grid. We're doing a bottom right grid, right?
Bottom left?
Bottom left.
Bottom left. That was a trick question. See that smile.
Oops. All right, so first things first, I'm going to set my grid depth. I'm going to lower that bit down just so that it's past my material. And I am not pressing, I am contacting that edge. Boom. Boom. Zoom out just to give you an idea of what I've done so far. I got that bottom edge. And now we're bringing it around town to the left. Contact the side of the bit. Drop that last probe.
Very nice.
Voila. Now we can import. Grab that sled file. And in my case, I'm rotating it 90 degrees and grabbing it by that bottom left anchor. Now I'm just dropping it at 0, 0, because again, I wanted making x equals 0, y equals 0. I'm doing that because I want to be able to, these edges are already cut for me, as well as this edge over here. Now if I was doing the opposing side, the back side, while I'm in this position, I can open up scale, and these are flip features. This is something that was released in the latest software update, Inverness. I don't know if we talk about flip enough, but it's really, really cool. Being able to totally flip your piece on axis, and I'm using this flip button because I actually rotated it already. So when I'm doing the back side, I just flip it. But for this one, since we're doing the original, or the top face.
Yeah. Another
There we
thing
go.
that was included in our latest software release was position also. So if you wanted to just type in 0, 0 and know that that is going exactly where you type in, then you can do that, but only if you upgrade your software.
I just like showing it off because it is so cool. So again, going to rotate that back to 90, grab that bottom left, and I don't feel like moving origin over. I'm just going to use position. X equals 0, y equals 0, done, and it moves for me.
Bam. Free software update for everybody. No reason not to.
Yep.
I love it.
Just got to connect your tool to Wi-Fi, and it'll do its thing. Okay, dokie. We got our file placed. Now there's a couple things in this file that you got to be aware of what they are. These outside dados, those are the backside. That's for the rails. These inside dados, this is for your T-track. Now it's sized for the Rockler T-track, which is about 3/4 of an inch wide by 3/8 deep. This over here is your handle dado, front handle or front fence dado, and this is the back fence dado. All this business in the middle, I'm not exactly sure what that's for. I didn't cut it. We're going to actually cut the track, or we're going to cut the sled with the table saw on its first run to establish that groove. So I disregarded this whole center area, and it kind of gives you a nice blue guideline where your blade is going to run. Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and start cutting at least one of the T-track columns, or the T-track dados, and we're going to dial in that fit, and then we're going to switch to a bigger cutter and do the fence.
Sweet. Let's do it.
Let me clamp this thing down.
So again, first we're gonna cut that T-track, which is here, 3/4 of an inch wide, but I suspect you're gonna sneak up on it.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Use offsets to do a roughing and a finishing pass, right?
I had to think about that.
Yeah, use offsets to do a roughing and a finishing pass so that we get a nice smooth finish that's right to dimension, and then check it and see where it goes from there, I suppose.
Probably use a negative offset, I
Yeah.
guess. And then for those of you that caught it, I actually just hopped back over into my old workspace. So I have 2 identical workspaces here, but I've already done some work on a previous workspace. I just wanted to use it as an example.
You should name your workspaces, Jake.
Oh, I should name my workspaces.
You can name your workspaces so you
Yeah.
don't have to remember what they are.
Here's a fun one too. You don't actually have to go into workspaces to name it. You just have to be in scan, tap that workspace number right there to rename it, and boom. What are we going to name it?
What should we call this? Let's call this crosscut sled top.
That's a lot of words.
X cut top.
Oh, I like that. X cut top.
Bam.
Bingo.
Now you don't have to remember, just like your 0 point.
It's like those roadway signs that say crossing here.
Yeah,
or
Xing. RR
I
Xing.
always read that as Xing. All right, let's go ahead and start. I'm going to give myself a Z touch. Got a 3/4 inch bit in there. Z touch. And my depth. I hide calipers everywhere. It's okay. So
That's why I can't find them.
so does everybody else. So we're at 0.375 3/8. I'm going to go a hair deeper because I would rather this be subflush than slightly protruding, because I want my sled surface to be totally flush. So that is 3/8.5 on my depth. We're doing a pocket first. We're starting here. Let's get going.
All right, nice. So Jake's cutting the pocket. Jake's pocketing out the area for the T-track here, and typically we recommend going 1 cutter diameter deep, but he's going the full 0.385 here. And I'd say that's okay for pocketing, honestly, a lot of the time. We really improved our pocketing algorithm with the latest software update also. So if you have an older software release and you've experienced jittery pocketing, it's so much better now. I'm just going to say it's way improved. So taking a little bit heavier of a cut is totally fine in my experience a lot of the time. You can see on Jake's screen how well he's doing. No unexpected retractions or anything. And then we'll be a little more careful when we sneak up on the finish pass. But the first pocketing pass with a big built-in offset doesn't have to be perfectly smooth and clean. It's mostly just for removing that material, like I said, for roughing, and then we'll come back and finish that in a minute. So coming around the corner here, you do want to try to make sure when you're pocketing that you still think in terms of conventional versus climb cutting. Especially with a deeper cut like this, we don't have a conventional or climb cutting rule built into our pocketing algorithm because it's a big area that you need to clear out in a different way for every pocket that exists. But try to think in terms of conventional cutting, and when you are working from the inside out of a pocket, which is the way that I typically do it, that means working clockwise. But if you work from the outside in of your pocket, that would mean working counterclockwise, kind of like our inside and outside cuts on Origin. So taking a quick break here to just vacuum out the slot and take a look at it, see how it looks.
Just double check my depth. It is a slightly deeper cut than I would normally take, but I got a fresh cutter in there. I feel confident, and like you were saying, making sure that I'm not climb cutting. You can see as I was going left to right, I was actually cutting, and then I was trying to sneak back in that channel on my way to the other side. So now we switch to an inside cut.
So here we go. Going into an inside cut at full depth with no offset, I think. Oh. Here we go. 0.01 offset. So we're going to take off most of that rough from the pocketing operation, leave a pretty smooth wall, check the fit. 0.01 inches is 1/100th of an inch, which for reference, for all the metric folks out there, I think that is about 1/4 of a millimeter, or 0.25 millimeters. And so it's pretty likely that after this cut, the T-track is not going to fit. But that's the point of sneaking up on your offsets and getting a nice snug fit on everything, especially when you don't want any slop in the cut. You want everything, not so much for these T-tracks, but for the fence, you want everything to stay nice and perpendicular. So let's see how it fits. Looks like not quite. Pretty tight. So going back in and adjusting the offsets again. Negative 0.004, which is negative 0.1 millimeters. And so a negative offset takes you to the larger, or like takes more of a cut than 0 offset. So we're moving 0.1 millimeters or 0.004 inches outside of the digital boundary of that inside cut. So it'll give us, I think, ideally a little bit of just right clearance on this track. And since we're taking away 0.01 plus 0.004, 0.014 inches of offset, it's going to be a really smooth cut. So no jerking origin around, and you're going to get a really nice wall finish.
Yeah.
Really nice edge quality on that.
And just what I was looking for.
Yeah, that's good.
Friction fit. Again, I did do this prior, so I know that 4,000 is going to fit really well. Because I'm relying on a little bit of friction, but mostly these screws to hold this track down. But friction never hurts. Okay, so we're just hearing.
Randall's here.
This is great. I love this. Randall just chimed in and said the big cut in the middle is for a replaceable insert that he decided not to cut. But now that I know that, being able to change that out, I mean, having the like a zero clearance throat plate in there is really cool.
Yeah.
So something to consider.
So we wouldn't really have needed to make 2-hole crosscut sleds had we known that.
Yeah.
We could have 190 degree insert and 145 degree insert.
And now I love this sled even more.
That's pretty cool.
This is awesome. Okay.
Well, now we've got
well,
two
I
sleds.
still have 2 sleds. Yeah. And what's fun too is you can step back in, Russ. We made the first sled we made was oriented one way, and this sled will be oriented the other way.
There we go. Yeah, that's something that we were talking about.
It's
before.
also kind of up to you too, like however you want. If you want the larger section of the sled hanging off to the left or the right, really depends on how your sled is set up. We have a pretty wide sled, so it didn't really matter. But yeah, okay.
Cool.
So
I love that.
This one fits fantastically. I'll take this tape off to get it out of the way.
Oh yeah, very nice.
And it is ever so slightly, if I get that fuzz out of there, it's sub-flush. Because again, I don't want my pieces to be running into it at all. And now I can't get it out.
That's such a good fit.
There it is.
Nice.
All right, next we're gonna move to a larger cutter. So when we're gonna pocket out the area for the back fence, which is this. Again, 2 pieces of ply glued up together. The step is for that additional T-track that we're going to putting in there, and that Rockler hardware that has the flip down, stop. I'm going to put a 3/4 inch bit in there, but I want to talk about this bit a little bit. If I can find it. There it is. So, bench cam is over here. Very specific thing about this bit, we've talked about this before. This is a center cutting bit. Now there's lots of types of bits like this out there. The thing that you want to avoid when buying any kind of bit, but I feel like it's more common when you go into larger diameter, is a non-center cutting. So you try to plunge this, you're going to have a bad time. But you plunge with that, since it cuts all the way across, it'll be okay. Plunge with caution. Like it's still a large bit plunging into material, so if you want to err on the side of caution, bump down your plunge speed, which for quick reference, it can be accessed right here in speeds on the bottom left, and you can adjust your plunge and auto speed. Maybe bump that down to say 10 or 8 inches per minute. The other thing is, like, my channel is pretty wide, so that's why I'm using a larger bit just to pocket it out and get rid of that material quickly. If I could do this with a 1/4 inch bit, but we'd be here for a little longer.
Long time.
Yeah.
I would also suggest that depth equal to cutter diameter doesn't really apply much past a 1/4 inch cutter.
Thank you.
1/16 of an inch cutter, you take a 1/16 of an inch depth of cut. 1/8 inch cutter, 1/8 inch depth of cut. 6 millimeter, 6 millimeter. But just because you have a 3/4 inch cutter does not mean that you should take 3/4 depth of cut in one pass.
Yeah.
That's asking for a bad time.
Yeah. I'm going to be doing a 1/4 inch. And it feels okay. I'm going to put my speed down to about 4 and my offset to 0. Depth at a 1/4 inch. All right. So I'm taking out this big pocket back here. What's the first thing I need to do? Tell Origin that I have a 0.75 inch cutter and Z-touch. Now you will see just how big the actual kerf I'm working with is here. There we go. So if I change this to an inside cut, it just totally fills up this entire space. That's all that darker area is my cut area. But again, we're going to start with a pocket. Okay. I'm going to do this. I'm going to have to move this camera. I can tell you that right now. There we go.
Nice. All right, let it rip. So yeah, we touched on this briefly, the idea of not pocketing 3/4 of an inch deep with a 3/4 inch wide cutter. And the reason for that is that the material that you remove is a function of the area of cutter that you present to the workpiece. So you can think about that in terms of a 1/4 inch wide cutter times a 1/4 inch deep equals a 1/4 times a 1/4. I guess that's a 1/16 of a cubic inch. 3/4 inch cutter times 3/4 inch deep is actually 9 times more material removal than a 1/4 inch cutter. So imagine the way that the router feels when you hit a knot, for example, in using a 1/4 inch cutter in a piece of wood. If you hit that same knot with a 3/4 inch cutter trying to take a 3/4 inch depth of cut, you're going to feel 9 times as much of a jerk there. Oh, we just lost the camera. All right. Okay. We'll leave that for now. With a 3/4 inch wide cutter at a 1/4 inch depth of cut, like Jake's doing right now, that's still actually 3 times more material removal than with a 1/4 inch cutter at a 1/4 inch depth of cut. So if you have an amount of material removal that you're comfortable with, you can do that math to predict how a different cutter is going to feel. If you know that you're comfortable with a 1/4 inch cutter at a 1/4 inch depth of cut, you could run a 3/4 inch diameter cutter at 1/3 of a quarter, 1/4 divided by 3 depth of cut, and that's the same amount of material removal. So that should actually end up feeling about the same at the end of the day. I think the maximum that I've ever done is an 8mm cutter at an 8mm depth of cut, which is pretty chunky. So this is definitely a big cut here, but it looks like Jake's handling it pretty well, coming around to the back end of that pocketing cut here. And we're pocketing because it leaves a really nice offset, roughing offset already baked into the pocket, so that when you come back in for your inside cut, you're taking off way less material, and it's a much smoother cut. Yeah, let's see how that looks.
Get some of this dust out of the way. And that looks great.
Yeah, that's really smooth. That's a good bottom of your pocket also.
Yeah. Nice thing
Good
about
smooth
using
bottom.
that larger cutter is it leaves typically because it's a larger thing, it's just a more consistent bottom of the pocket.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now I'm going to change that to an inside. I can still adjust. I'm still going to be able to adjust for the fitment of my piece here. But I'm also just going to leave the tape on. After I finish this project, I'm going to leave the tape on just in case I need to edit any one of these features.
Yeah, and we don't need all of this tape because we're going to extract the crosscut sled from the raw stock. But the way that would work if you need to go back in and rescan is just do an add to scan and start with the tape that already exists for the crosscut sled, and then you can add whatever other tape you need around it.
Yep.
It'll recalibrate.
All right, I'm going to do another pass with this 3/4 cutter before I switch back to my 1/4 inch cutter, but with still a beefy offset of 0.04. And again, this is just to get rid of as much material as I can.
Yeah, we know that that plywood is... We know that that plywood that we have is definitely thinner than 3/4 inch. I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head what this specific plywood thickness is because it's all different. Every sheet that we have here is different by 1/100 of an inch or so. But the last sheet that I used here was 0.69 inches, which if you double that up, that's a whole 1/8 inch that you would be off if you assume that there was no offset on that. So coming around on the inside cut here, you can see how much smoother Jake is with Origin, and that's just because he's removing so much less material. And that's the whole point of pocketing first and then doing an inside cut. Pocketing roughs out most of the material so that you can remove less material on your later passes. I don't know if this is going to be the last pass or not. We're going to have to do a test fit on that. But ideally you remove less and less material as you come closer to your ideal dimension, so that the less material you are removing, the smoother you are using Origin. Origin is, at the end of the day, human and robotics working together. So the smoother that you operate the tool, the smoother your cuts are going to be. And he's just coming back here on the back side of this inside cut. Yeah. Let's brush it out and see how it fits.
So again, I left that 0.04 offset. I'm going big because I know that my material is a little thinner than what this is set up for.
Ooh, good thing you did. That's like perfect right there.
That is definitely like hammer-inable.
Gonna do a little more.
But I'm going to do a little bit more just because we want to. It's going to be a glue joint still. We're going to put glue in there and possibly some screws from the bottom. I have not decided yet. But something that we should always consider, whatever we do with offsets, especially when we're making a closed shape, affects both sides. So if I do 0.03,
0.03, that's 0.01 per side,
right?
right? So that's 0.02 total extra width.
I'm going to do 0.035.
Nice. I like that.
All right, I'll make this quick.
Okay. So 0.035 offset coming down from 0.04 means that Jake's only taking 0.005 inches off per side. Just really fine tuning that cut, the width of that cut, because we know that that test fit was right on the edge of being able to hand fit those two pieces together. Typically here, you could have malleted that or hammered that all together, but typically here we go for the squeaky fit. A fit that can be assembled by hand, but that stays together when you take your hands off it. So we'll see how close we get to that. Seems like we're really just sneaking right up on this one. One of the beauties of Origin here is that Jake's working on like quite a large workpiece, honestly. And it could be even bigger. Origin has theoretically an infinite work area. We know people doing floor installs with Origin, really large stuff. So pretty cool to see a bigger project come through here on Sessions. And what was that you did in the middle there, Jake? You dusted it off so that you could see the tape?
Exactly. I had, because I'm using that big cutter, I did have a lot of dust on my surface, and I brushed that off so that we can see the markers nice and clear. You know what I'd like to do is I'm still using that 3/4 inch cutter, but I just took 5/1000ths of an inch off.
Mm-hmm.
It's like...
it's not very much proportionately. It's
yeah,
like,
it
so feels cool. Like less with a 3/4 of an inch cutter than it would with an 1/8 inch or a 1/16 inch cutter. It feels like more with a smaller cutter.
There we go.
That's pretty good.
That's what I'm talking about.
I love that.
See if we can come down to the side cam. It's a little long because I need to chisel out the edges, but that is what we're going for.
Mm-hmm. One thing that we do typically with our projects, our hub projects, so that you don't have to chisel out the edges, is any pocket that you have a square piece fitting into, especially if it overhangs or comes right to the edge of a project. We would overhang that pocket by half the diameter or the radius of the cutter so that you just extend past and end up clearing all that. But it's not a big deal to chisel something out. We like working with hand tools too.
Yeah, definitely not. And if it doesn't extend past, just being mindful of how you're rounding over things. So,
yeah, that too.
This is kind of like one of my favorite tricks to do with Origin, because bringing it, like, having nice tight 90-degree corners is really cool, but also not having to bust out the chisel is also pretty cool. So it depends on your approach on things, but I really love rounding things over or putting like an 1/8 inch round over, so that straight off of a 1/4 inch bit in Origin, they're going to fit together.
That's really nice. You can't see it. It's on our other cleat wall, but we've got a trim router dedicated to an 1/8 inch round over.
Yeah.
Because we use it so much.
Yep. All right, folks. That is the table saw. Did I miss any particular things I wanted to talk about it?
I think that covers it. Perpendicularity of gridding and flipping, which is really awesome. I don't think that we covered that this is the outline of the crosscut sled. We cut that just to show you what the whole thing's going to look like when it's done, even though it's not cut out. But I think the main point is flexibility of gridding and perpendicularity, and being able to tweak as we go for really good fits with wildly variable plywood, track that even needed a little bit of tweaking to fit just right.
Yeah, and again, I don't know for sure if the distance between those grooves on different table saws is a standardized thing, but the fact that you can cut one and be able to do the other one by hand is really still getting all the benefits of making a solid or a sled with Origin, as far as the perpendicularity for any saw. And then this is just a piece, 3 pieces of plywood cut with Origin using on-tool CAD, just make a couple of rounded rectangles, and that, once everything's kind of glued up and set, that is just an additional stop block. You can see in the photos of the project, Randall paints this bright red, and this is like the no-go zone.
Yeah,
This
don't
is the
push
one place
here.
you shouldn't grab.
Yeah, which I love, especially in a shared shop.
Yes, you can never be too straightforward with the dangers and the details. in
I
a
like
shared
that.
shop.
Yeah, be straightforward. It's not that we're not trusting.
Yeah.
It's that we're straightforward.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.